My name is Clara, and I'm 36. It's my first week of retirement sitting on my Ohio porch with coffee, watching the sunrise paint the sky soft pink. I thought I'd feel free after 15 years as a nurse, but there's this quiet ache in my chest. Then my daughter Samantha steps out, her face hard, and says, "I don't feed extra mouths, Mom. I got you a job." Her words hit like a slap, but I smile, nod, and take the flyer she hands me. Why is she so cold? Have you ever felt blindsided by someone you love? Drop a comment with where you're watching from, hit like and subscribe to unpack this story with me. I sat at my kitchen table, the flyer Samantha gave me spread out in front of me. The paper was creased like she'd folded it too many times before working up the nerve to hand it over. Cashier at Miller's Supermarket, $8 an hour part-time, no benefits. My fingers traced the bold print and my stomach twisted. I'd spent 15 years as a nurse holding hands through pain-stitching wounds, staying calm when monitors screamed. Now my daughter thought I belonged behind a register scanning soup cans. I leaned back in my chair, the wood creaking under me. The house was too quiet, just the hum of the fridge and the faint tick of the clock on the wall. I tried to picture Samantha's face when she said those words this morning. "I don't feed extra mouths." Her eyes had been sharp, but her hands shook just a little, like she wasn't as sure as she sounded. Was she angry? Scared? I couldn't tell, and that scared me more than the flyer. I thought about calling her, but my phone stayed dark on the table. Instead, I closed my eyes and saw her at 6, her tiny arms wrapped around my waist, when I came home from a double shift. She'd begged me to stay home, promising she'd make me pancakes forever if I didn't have to work. I'd laugh, kiss her forehead, and say, "One day, kiddo, we'll have all the time in the world." Now she was 19, a college sophomore, and somehow I was the burden she couldn't carry. The flyer crinkled as I picked it up again. I smoothed it out, and something slipped from the folds, landing on the table with a soft thud. A photo edge's worn colors faded. Me and Samantha at her high school graduation last year. I was beaming my arm around her, her cap tilted just right. She'd been so proud that day, telling everyone her mom was a nurse who saved lives. I stared at the photo, my throat tight. Had she tucked it in the flyer on purpose? Was it her way of saying she still cared? Or just a careless mistake I needed to talk to someone? Not Samantha, not yet. I grabbed my keys and drove to Rachel's Diner, the one place in town where I could always think straight. The bell above the door jingled as I walked in, and the smell of bacon and coffee hit me like a warm hug. Rachel was behind the counter, her apron smudged with flour, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun. She saw me and grinned, but her smile faded when she caught my expression. "What's wrong, Clara?" she asked, sliding a mug of coffee my way before I even sat down. I set the flyer and the photo on the counter, pushing them toward her. "Samantha thinks I need this." Rachel's eyes scanned the flyer, and she let out a low whistle. "A cashier." "Clara, you're a damn hero, not a barcode scanner." What's she thinking? I sipped the coffee, letting the heat ground me. She said I'm an extra mouth to feed, like I'm some stray she's stuck with. Rachel's jaw dropped, and she leaned across the counter, her voice low. "She said that to you, the woman who raised her alone after Tom died." I nodded, my fingers curling around the mug. "Tom. My husband gone 5 years now. I'd worked harder after he passed, picking up extra shifts to keep Samantha and Ethan fed, clothed, dreaming. I never complained, not once. And now this." Rachel shook her head, tossing a rag over her shoulder. "That girl's got some nerve." "You gonna take the job?" "I don't know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need to talk to her first." I found Samantha in her room when I got home, sprawled on her bed, earbuds in her laptop glowing with some college assignment. Her room was a mess, clothes piled on the chair, books scattered on the floor. I knocked softly, and she pulled out one earbud, glancing up with that guarded look she'd worn since she started college. "Hey," I said, holding up the flyer. "Can we talk about this?" She sat up, crossing her arms. "What's there to talk about?" "You're not working, Mom. Everyone pulls their weight." Her words hit like a punch, but I kept my voice steady. "Samantha, I worked for years. I raised you and Ethan alone. Why do you think I'm a burden now?" She shrugged, her eyes flicking to her laptop. "It's just how it is. You're retired. You can't just sit around." I wanted to shake her to make her see me, but I just stood there, the photo still in my pocket, heavy as a stone. "Did someone tell you to say that I asked thinking of her new college friends, the ones she talked about nonstop?" She rolled her eyes. "No, Mom. It's common sense." I left her room, my chest tight, the flyer still in my hand. Common sense. Like I was a problem to be solved. I sank onto the couch, staring at the photo of us again. Her smile in it was so wide, so real. Where had that girl gone? And why did I feel like I was losing her? The next morning, I woke with a dull ache behind my eyes, like I'd been crying in my sleep. I couldn't shake Samantha's words the way she'd dismissed me like I was a line item in her budget. I needed to see this job for myself to understand what she thought I deserved. I pulled on a sweater, grabbed my purse, and drove to Miller's supermarket, the flyer tucked in my pocket like a guilty secret. The parking lot was half empty, a few carts rattling in the breeze. Inside, the store was a maze of bright lights and canned music, the kind that made your head throb if you stayed too long. I wandered past towering shelves of cereal and detergent, my sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. The cashier lanes stretched out ahead, each one manned by someone in a red vest, their faces blank as they scanned items. Was this really where Samantha saw me? A woman with a neat bun and a name tag reading Marjorie approached me, her smile warm but practiced. "Can I help you, ma'am?" I hesitated, my fingers brushing the flyer in my pocket. "I'm Clara. My daughter Samantha mentioned a cashier job." Marjorie's face lit up. "Oh, you're Samantha's mom. She called yesterday, said you were eager to start. Let me show you around." Eager. The word stung like Samantha had painted me as desperate. I followed Marjorie, my throat tight, as she pointed out the break room, the time clock, the employee lockers. Her voice was kind, but every word felt like a step further from who I was. She talked about schedules, dress codes, how to handle difficult customers. I nodded, but my mind drifted to the hospital, to the nights I'd stayed late to comfort a scared patient, my hands steady even when I was bone-tired. We stopped by the customer service desk, and Marjorie lowered her voice. "Samantha sounded worried about you. Said you needed something to keep you busy now that you're retired." I froze, my pulse loud in my ears. Worried or ashamed? I forced a smile, muttering, "She's just looking out for me." Marjorie nodded, but her eyes lingered like she saw more than I wanted her to. As we walked back toward the front, I overheard two young cashiers near the registers, their voices low but sharp. "Another retiree taking jobs from kids who need them," one muttered, adjusting her vest. "Like go knit or something." The other laughed, and I felt my face burn. I wanted to turn and tell them I'd saved lives, that I'd held dying hands and fought for every heartbeat. But I just kept walking, my steps heavy, Marjorie's tour fading into a hum. Was this what the world saw now? An old woman stealing opportunities, clogging up the system? Near the exit, a customer fumbled with her cart, and a bottle of baby formula slipped from her hands, rolling toward me. I bent down without thinking, picking it up and handing it back with a smile. "Careful now," I said, my voice soft, the way I used to talk to new moms in the maternity ward. The woman thanked me, and for a moment, I was back in my scrubs, useful, needed. Marjorie caught my eye and nodded, a flicker of respect in her expression. But as I drove home, that moment faded, replaced by a gnawing fear. Samantha hadn't just handed me a job. She'd handed me a verdict. Useless. A burden. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, and pictured her face the way she'd shrugged last night, like I was a problem she'd already solved. I wanted to scream to demand why she thought this was okay. But deeper down, a quieter voice whispered, what if she was right? What if I'd lost my place? Not just in her life, but in the world. I pulled into my driveway, the engine ticking as it cooled. The flyer was still in my pocket, and I hadn't signed anything at the store, hadn't committed. But the weight of it all, Samantha's words, the cashier's whispers, Marjorie's pity pressed against my chest. I stared at my house, the porch where this all started, and felt something shift inside me, a mix of anger and dread. This wasn't just about a job. This was about who I was and who Samantha thought I'd become. I spent the next day cleaning the house, scrubbing counters and folding laundry, anything to keep my hands busy and my mind off Samantha's words. But every squeak of the sponge felt like her voice echoing, everyone pulls their weight. By evening, I decided to try again to bridge the gap between us. I made my late husband's lasagna, the one Samantha used to beg for as a kid, hoping the smell of garlic and cheese would soften her. Ethan was coming over too, and I pictured us laughing around the table like we used to. The kitchen was warm, the oven humming when Ethan walked in, his construction boots leaving faint dust on the rug. He hugged me tight, his flannel shirt smelling of sawdust. "Smells like Dad's recipe," he said, grinning. At 22, he was steady my rock, but I could see the worry in his eyes, like he sensed the tension I hadn't voiced. "Where's your sister?" I asked, setting the table with our good plates, the ones we saved for special nights. He shrugged, grabbing a soda from the fridge. "Probably still at the library." "She's been weird lately, Mom. Stressed about school." I nodded, but my stomach tightened. Stressed didn't explain why she'd turned on me. I checked my phone, hoping for a text from her, but the screen was blank. The lasagna was ready, bubbling and golden, when Samantha finally walked in 20 minutes late. Her backpack thudded to the floor, and she barely glanced at the table before pulling out her phone, thumbs flying over the screen. "Dinner's ready," I said, keeping my voice light, though it felt like walking on glass. "Made your favorite." She looked up, her expression flat. "Oh. Cool." She slid into her chair, still texting, and I bit my lip, swallowing the urge to snap. Ethan shot her a look, his jaw tight, but she didn't notice. We started eating, the clink of forks loud in the silence. I tried to start a conversation, asking Ethan about his latest job, a renovation downtown. He lit up, talking about restoring an old staircase, but Samantha stayed glued to her phone, barely touching her food. I took a deep breath, forcing a smile. "Samantha, how's college going? Any big projects?" She sighed, setting her phone down with a clunk. "It's fine. Just a lot of work." Ethan leaned forward, his voice sharp. "Maybe put the phone away, Sam. Mom made this for us." She rolled her eyes, shoving her plate back. "What's the big deal?" "It's just dinner." "Just dinner?" Ethan's fork hit the table louder than I expected. "Mom's trying, and you're acting like she's invisible." "What's your problem?" Samantha's eyes narrowed, and she leaned toward him, her voice low and cutting. "My problem? Mom's retired, not dead. She can work, Ethan. Stop babying her." I froze, the lasagna turning to ash in my mouth. My hands gripped the edge of the table, and I felt the room shrink, the air too thick to breathe. "Samantha," I said, my voice shaking. "Why do you keep saying that? I worked for years. I raised you both alone. Why is it suddenly my job to prove myself to you?" She crossed her arms, her chin jutting out. "Because you're not doing anything, Mom. You're just here. Ethan's killing himself on job sites, and I'm drowning in loans. We're all working, and you're what? baking Ethan slammed his hand on the table, making the glasses rattle. "That's enough, Sam. You don't get to talk to her like that. Stop defending her," she snapped, her voice rising. "She's not helpless. She can get a job, contribute instead of sitting around like some queen." I stared at her, my heart pounding, her words slicing deeper than I thought possible. This wasn't just about the supermarket job. This was her rewriting our whole life, like every sacrifice I'd made was nothing. I wanted to scream, to tell her about the nights I went without sleep, the bills I paid in secret, the dreams I buried to keep her safe. But my throat locked, and all I could do was stand my chair, scraping the floor. "Clara," Ethan said softly, reaching for my arm, but I shook my head, my eyes burning. Samantha didn't move her face hard, but I saw her hands clench under the table, her knuckles white. Was she angry? Or was she scared? I couldn't tell anymore, and that hurt, worst of all. I walked to the sink, gripping the counter, the lasagna dish still warm under my fingers. The family I'd fought for felt like it was slipping away, and I didn't know how to stop it. I stood at the sink, my hands trembling as I scraped leftover lasagna into the trash. The kitchen felt like a battlefield, the air thick with words we couldn't take back. Ethan's chair creaked as he stood, his voice low. "I'm gonna talk to her, Mom. This isn't right." Before I could stop him, he stormed toward Samantha's room, the slam of her door echoing through the house. I wanted to follow to fix this, but my feet stayed rooted, heavy as stone. I turned on the faucet, letting the rush of water drown out the muffled argument down the hall. My reflection stared back from the window above the sink, eyes red lines deeper than I remembered. I barely recognized myself. Had I changed so much in a week of retirement, or had Samantha's words carved me into something new, something smaller? I shut off the water and dried my hands, the towel rough against my skin. Outside, the streetlights buzzed, casting a faint glow into the living room. I sank onto the couch, my body aching like I'd run a marathon. The fight at dinner kept replaying each word, a fresh cut. Samantha's voice, sharp and cold, calling me a queen who sat around. Ethan's anger, trying to shield me, but only making the rift wider. I pulled a throw blanket over my lap, the one Samantha used to curl up under when she was little, watching cartoons, while I studied for nursing exams. Back then, she'd look at me like I could do anything. Now, I was just a weight she couldn't carry. The front door clicked open, and I tensed, expecting Samantha. But it was just the wind, the latch loose again. I got up to close it, my bare feet cold on the hardwood. As I passed the hallway, I heard Ethan's voice, softer now, pleading. "You're hurting her, Sam. She's our mom, not some roommate you can boss around." Samantha's reply was too quiet to catch, but the tone was stubborn, unyielding. I leaned against the wall, my breath shallow, wanting to barge in, but terrified of what she'd say next. I wandered back to the kitchen, needing something to do, and started wiping down the table. My eyes caught on Samantha's backpack slumped by the door where she'd dropped it. A corner of fabric peeked out, familiar faded blue. I knelt and pulled it free, my heart sinking. My old nursing scrubs, the ones I'd worn for years, now crumpled and used as her pajamas. The sight hit me harder than her words at dinner. It wasn't just disrespect. It was like she was erasing who I'd been, turning my past into something casual, worthless. I clutched the scrubs, my nails digging into the fabric. Memories flooded in, the first time I wore them, nervous but proud, walking into the hospital like I belonged. The nights I came home in them, exhausted but fulfilled, knowing I'd made a difference. Samantha used to beg to try them on, giggling as the sleeves flopped over her hands. Now they were a prop in her rebellion, a way to mock the life I'd built for us. The door to her room opened, and I shoved the scrubs back into her bag, my hands shaking. Ethan walked out, his face tight, and Samantha trailed behind, her arms crossed. She glanced at me, her eyes flickering with something, guilt, maybe, or defiance. "I'm going to bed," she muttered, brushing past me to grab her backpack. She didn't notice, my expression, didn't see the way my hands clenched at my sides. Ethan waited until her door clicked shut, then turned to me. "She's stressed, Mom. College is killing her, and she's got these loans piling up. She didn't tell you because she didn't want you to worry." I knotted my throat too tight to speak. "Loans." That explained the edge in her voice, the way she'd been pulling away. But why hadn't she come to me? I'd always been her safe place, the one who fixed things. Now she was shutting me out, punishing me for something I didn't understand. "She's not herself," Ethan said, rubbing the back of his neck. "But she's wrong about you. You know that, right?" I wanted to believe him. But doubt coiled in my chest, cold and heavy. "I don't know what I know anymore," I said, my voice cracking. He hugged me, his arms strong, but it didn't fill the hole Samantha's words had left. I lay awake that night, the house silent, except for the creak of pipes. My bedroom felt too big, the empty side of the bed a reminder of Tom, of the life we'd planned before he was gone. I kept seeing the scrubs the way Samantha had used them to hurt me without even knowing. She was struggling, sure, but so was I. And she'd chosen to push me away, to make me the enemy. The pain settled deep, a weight I couldn't shake, and I knew this wasn't over. Something bigger was coming, something I wasn't ready for. I woke up the next morning with a plan, or at least the closest thing to one I could muster. I couldn't keep dodging Samantha's judgment, couldn't let her words define me. If she wanted me to take this supermarket job, fine. I'd go to the interview, hear them out, prove I wasn't the useless weight she thought. But my hands shook as I ironed my old work blazer, the one I hadn't worn since my last hospital shift. It smelled faintly of antiseptic, a ghost of the life I'd left behind. Miller's supermarket was busier today, the parking lot buzzing with morning shoppers. I walked in, my blazer stiff against my shoulders, feeling like an imposter in my own skin. The air was thick with the smell of fresh bread from the bakery section, and I followed the signs to the manager's office, my heels clicking too loudly on the tile. Marjorie was waiting, her smile as warm as before, but there was a clipboard in her hand, now, a checklist that made this feel real. "Clara, good to see you," she said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. The office was cramped, stacked with files and a flickering fluorescent light. Samantha said, "You're ready to jump in. Let's talk about the role." I nodded, my mouth dry. Ready? That word again, like I'd begged for this. I sat smoothing my blazer and tried to focus as Marjorie ran through the job details, 30 hours a week, early shifts, handling cash and complaints. Her voice was steady, professional, but every word felt like a step further from the woman I'd been. I kept picturing the hospital, the way my hands knew exactly what to do in a crisis, the way patients looked at me like I was their lifeline. "Why do you want this job, Clara?" Marjorie asked, her pen poised over her clipboard. The question hit me like a brick. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Why was I here? Because my daughter thought I was a burden, because I was too scared to fight her. I stared at the desk at a coffee mug with "World's Best Mom" scrawled on it, and my chest tightened. I didn't have an answer that wouldn't break me to say. My phone buzzed in my purse, and I glanced down, grateful for the distraction. A text from Samantha. "Don't mess this up, Mom." I froze my breath, catching. The words glowed on the screen, sharp and cold, like she was standing there judging me. I set the phone face down, my hands clenching in my lap. But the message burned into me, stoking a fire I hadn't felt in days. Marjorie tilted her head, her eyes softening. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just family stuff." She nodded like she understood and started talking about training schedules. But my mind was spinning, Samantha's text looping in my head. Don't mess this up. Like I was a child, like I'd spent my life failing her. I tried to focus, but the room felt smaller, the walls closing in. Marjorie's voice faded to a hum, and I gripped the armrests, my nails digging into the wood. Clara. You seem distracted, Marjorie said, gently setting her clipboard down. This job's not for everyone. I worked retail to put my kids through school, so I get it. It's tough, but it's honest work. Is this really what you want? Her kindness undid me. I looked at her, at the lines around her eyes, the weight of her own choices etched there. She was trying to help, but all I could think was that I didn't belong here. I'd spent years saving lives, not ringing up groceries, and yet here I was, proving something to a daughter who couldn't even look at me without resentment. I need to think about it, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I stood, my legs unsteady, and thanked her, promising to call soon. But as I walked out, the supermarket's noise swallowed me, carts, rattling kids, whining scanners beeping. I felt like I was drowning, every sound a reminder of the life Samantha wanted for me. In the parking lot, I leaned against my car, the cold metal grounding me. My phone buzzed again, another text from Samantha. You done yet? I didn't reply. I couldn't. The fire in my chest was spreading, a mix of rage and grief I didn't know how to hold. I'd come here to prove I could do this, but all I'd proven was how far I'd fallen in her eyes. And I wasn't sure I could climb back. Slid into my car, the door slamming harder than I meant. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel. Samantha's texts still burning in my mind. I needed to move to think, but the weight of the interview clung to me like damp clothes. I started driving, no destination, just the hum of the engine and the blur of suburban streets. My eyes stung, and I swiped at them, refusing to let the tears fall. Not yet. I ended up at a gas station, the neon sign flickering in the gray afternoon light. I pulled over, my breath ragged, and rested my forehead on the wheel. The world felt too heavy, like I was carrying every year of sacrifice in my chest. I wanted to call Rachel, to hear her laugh and tell me I was bigger than this, but my phone stayed silent in my purse. I was alone, and for the first time, that felt like the truth. A sharp tap on my window jolted me upright. Ethan stood there, his work jacket streaked with dust, his face tight with worry. I rolled down the window, my heart racing. How'd you find me? Saw your car from the road? He said, leaning in. You okay, Mom? You look like hell. I forced a laugh, but it came out brittle. Just needed some air. The interview, it was a lot. He nodded, his eyes searching mine. Samantha's out of line, but she's freaking out about money. I didn't want to tell you, but she's behind on tuition. Found a letter in her room. My stomach dropped. Tuition. The word landed like a stone, stirring up guilt and anger. Why hadn't she told me I'd have sold the house, worked doubles, anything to help, but she'd chosen to push me away, to make me the problem. I opened my mouth to say something, but my phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with Samantha's name. I hesitated, then answered, my voice flat. What, you done at Miller's? She asked, her tone clipped like she was checking off a list. I didn't take the job, I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. I'm not doing it, Samantha. There was a pause, so long I thought she'd hung up. Then her voice came low and sharp. Wow, Mom. Really? You're gonna make this harder for everyone. I gripped the phone, my knuckles white. Make what harder? You calling me a burden? You deciding I'm nothing without a paycheck? Ethan's eyes widened, and he stepped closer, but I waved him off. Samantha's laugh crackled through the speaker, bitter and cold. You're not nothing, Mom. You're just not helping. Ethan's breaking his back and I'm drowning in debt. And you're What, too proud to scan groceries? Her words hit like a slap, each one tearing open something raw. I leaned back my head against the seat, my voice shaking. I'm your mother, Samantha. Not some extra mouth you get to shame. Then act like it, she shouted, her voice breaking. Stop living off us. I got you that job so you'd do something, anything, but you can't even handle that. The line went dead, and I stared at the phone, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Ethan reached through the window, his hand on my shoulder, but I barely felt it. My chest was caving in, the world narrowing to her words. Stop living off us. I saw her face, not the little girl who'd clung to me, but the stranger she'd become. Her eyes hard, her voice slicing me apart. I looked up at Ethan, his mouth moving, but I couldn't hear him over the roar in my head. On the passenger seat, my purse had tipped over, spilling a small notebook I used for grocery lists. Tucked inside was a drawing Samantha made when she was 8, me in a nurse's cap, a red cape flying behind me. Superhero Mom, she'd written in wobbly letters. I touched it, my fingers trembling, and the dam broke. Tears spilled down my cheeks, hot and unstoppable, as the truth crashed over me. My daughter didn't just resent me, she didn't know me at all. I sat in my car, the gas station's neon glow fading as the sky turned dark. Ethan's hand was still on my shoulder, his voice soft, urging me to come home, but I couldn't move. Samantha's words echoed in my head. Stop living off us, each syllable a blade. The drawing of Superhero Mom lay crumpled on the seat, its edges curling like it was ashamed to be seen. I wiped my face, the tears cold against my skin, and something shifted inside me, a spark of defiance I hadn't felt in weeks. I'm okay, Ethan, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Go home. I need to figure this out. He hesitated, his brow furrowed, but nodded and stepped back. I watched him walk to his truck, his shoulders hunched, and I knew he was carrying too much for me for Samantha. I couldn't let that continue. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over Samantha's name, but instead, I scrolled to Diana's. My old nursing colleague, the one who'd looked at me like I was still worth something when we met at the pharmacy. I typed a quick message. Any openings at the hospital need to talk. Her reply came fast. Call me tomorrow. We're short on consultants. You'd be perfect. My heart skipped a mix of fear and relief. Consulting wasn't full-time nursing, but it was something, a chance to use my skills to be me again. I set the phone down, my hands steady for the first time all day. This was my move, not Samantha's. I wasn't going to scan groceries to prove my worth. I was going to fight for the life I'd earned. The next morning, I drove to Rachel's diner, needing her clarity before I made this real. The breakfast rush was in full swing, the air thick with the smell of pancakes and frying eggs. Rachel was flipping orders behind the counter, her laugh cutting through the clatter of plates. She saw me and waved me to a stool, sliding a plate of hash browns my way without asking. You look different, she said, eyeing me as she poured coffee. What's up? I took a deep breath, the words spilling out. I didn't take the supermarket job. I'm done letting Samantha decide who I am. I texted Diana about a hospital consulting gig. It's not nursing, but it's close. Rachel's eyes widened, and she leaned across the counter, grinning. That's my Clara kicking ass and taking names. You gonna tell Sam? Not yet, I said, stirring my coffee, the spoon clinking against the mug. I need to do this for me first. She nodded, but her expression turned serious. Good, but don't let her off easy. She hurt you, Clara. You gotta deal with that, or it'll fester. I knew she was right, but the thought of facing Samantha made my stomach twist. I'd spent years shielding her, swallowing my own pain to keep her safe. Now I had to stand up not just for me, but for the truth between us. I ate a bite of hash browns, the salt grounding me, and felt a quiet strength building like a muscle I'd forgotten I had. Back home, I dug through my closet, pulling out my old nursing badge, the plastic worn, but the name Clara RN still clear. I clipped it to my shirt just to feel it, the weight of who I'd been. The mirror showed a woman I hadn't seen in a while, not broken, but ready to fight. I called Diana, my voice calm, as we set a meeting for the next day. She sounded excited, like she'd been waiting for me to come back. I hung up my pulse, quickening not with fear, but with purpose. Ethan stopped by that afternoon, his tool belt clanking as he leaned against the kitchen counter. "Sam's been quiet," he said, his eyes searching mine. "I think she knows she went too far." I nodded, chopping vegetables for soup, the knife steady in my hand. "She's scared, Ethan, but so am I. I'm doing something about it." He tilted his head, curious, but I didn't tell him about the hospital yet. This was mine to carry for now. I stirred the pot, the steam rising, and felt the spark inside me grow, a fire I wasn't ready to name but couldn't ignore. I was moving forward, not because Samantha demanded it, but because I deserved it. I spent the evening preparing for my meeting with Diana, flipping through old nursing journals I'd kept in a box under the bed. The pages were dog-eared, filled with my handwritten notes from years ago, reminders of a time when I felt unstoppable. I traced the ink, my fingers lingering on terms like triage and patient advocacy, words that used to define me. Samantha's voice still lingered, sharp and accusing, but I pushed it down. This wasn't about her anymore. This was about reclaiming what I'd let slip away. The next morning, I dressed carefully, choosing a crisp white blouse and my old work shoes polished to a shine. The nursing badge stayed pinned to my shirt, a quiet promise to myself. I drove to the hospital, the familiar brick building looming ahead, its windows glinting in the early light. My stomach fluttered, not with fear, but with a kind of hunger, like I was waking up after a long sleep. Diana met me in the lobby. Her scrubs wrinkled from an overnight shift, but her smile was bright. "Clara, you look ready," she said, leading me to a conference room. The space was small, with a long table and a whiteboard covered in schedules. She outlined the consulting role, training new nurses, reviewing protocols, part-time but meaningful. "You'd be guiding the next generation," she said, her eyes steady. "We need someone with your instincts." I nodded, my throat tight with gratitude. This wasn't just a job. It was a lifeline back to who I was. We talked details, hours, pay, expectations, and I felt my old confidence stirring like a muscle flexing after too long at rest. Diana handed me a folder with training materials, her hand lingering on mine. "You didn't have to retire, you know. You were the best of us." Her words hit deep, and I blinked hard, keeping my composure. "I thought I was done," I admitted. "But maybe I'm not." Back home, I knew I couldn't avoid Samantha forever. She was in the living room when I walked in, curled on the couch with a textbook, her hair tucked behind her ears. The sight of her, so young and stubborn, softened me for a moment, but I steeled myself. I set my purse down, the nursing badge still clipped to my shirt, and sat across from her. "We need to talk," I said, my voice calm but firm. She looked up, her eyes narrowing slightly, like she was bracing for a fight. "About what? The job?" "I didn't take it," I said, watching her face. "Not the supermarket. I'm going back to the hospital consulting. It's what I'm good at, Samantha. Not what you decided I should do." Her mouth opened, then closed, her fingers tightening on her book. "So, you're just..." ignoring what I said. "No," I said, leaning forward, my gaze steady. "I heard you. You think I'm a burden, that I'm living off you and Ethan, but I'm your mother. not your tenant. I've carried us for years, and I'm done letting you make me feel small." She flinched, her cheeks flushing, and for a moment I saw the little girl who'd cry when I left for night shifts, scared I wouldn't come back. "I didn't mean it like that," she mumbled, her voice breaking. My roommate's family cut her off and she's struggling, and I got scared we'd end up like that. I thought you working would help." Her confession hung between us, raw and jagged. I wanted to reach for her to pull her close, but I held back, letting the truth settle. "You could have told me," I said, softly. "We're a team, Samantha, but you don't get to push me into a box to feel safe." She looked down, her hands twisting in her lap. "I'm sorry," she whispered, but it was fragile, like she wasn't sure she meant it yet. I stood, my heart heavy, but lighter than it had been. "I'm starting at the hospital next week, and I'll help with your tuition, but you need to meet me halfway. Maybe we try counseling, all of us. Think about it." She didn't answer, her eyes fixed on her book. But I saw her shoulders tremble, a crack in her armor. I walked to the kitchen, pulling the childhood drawing from my purse, the one of me as a superhero. I set it on the counter facing her and said, "You used to believe in me. I'm still that person." I left her there, the house quiet, except for the hum of the fridge. In my bedroom, I unclipped the nursing badge and held it, its edges smooth from years of wear. I didn't need Samantha's approval, not anymore. I'd chosen my path, and as I set the badge on my dresser, I felt a stillness, a strength that didn't need words. I was enough. My first day at the hospital was a blur of new faces and old routines. I walked through the halls, the squeak of my shoes blending with the steady beep of monitors. The consulting role had me training a group of rookie nurses, their eyes wide with nerves and ambition. I stood at the front of the classroom, a dry erase marker in hand, explaining how to prioritize patients in a crisis. My voice was steady, but my body hummed with a strange mix of adrenaline and exhaustion, like I'd been holding my breath for weeks. The hospital smelled of bleach and coffee, a scent that pulled me back to my old life, but sharper now, more vivid. I moved through the day correcting a nurse's chart entry, demonstrating a catheter insertion on a mannequin, my hands remembering every motion. Diana stopped by during a break, her smile tired but proud. "You're a natural, Clara. They're lucky to have you." I nodded, managing a smile, but her words stirred a quiet ache. Lucky. I hadn't felt that in a long time. The truth was, I was tired, the kind of bone-deep weariness that came from carrying too much for too long. Balancing the hospital with home with Samantha's silence was like walking a tightrope. I'd chosen this path, but it didn't make the weight any lighter. At lunch, I sat in the staff lounge, a sandwich untouched on the table. A young nurse, barely 20, plopped down across from me, her scrubs still creased from the store. "You're the new consultant, right?" she asked, popping open a soda. "Heard you used to be a big deal around here." I laughed softly, caught off guard. "Big deal's a stretch. Just been around a while." She shrugged, her ponytail bouncing. "Still, you're kinda old school. Bet you've got stories." Her tone was light, but the word old school stung a faint echo of Samantha's judgment. I brushed it off, but it lingered, a reminder that even here I was fighting to prove my place. The afternoon was tougher. I led a session on emergency protocols, but one of the trainees, a sharp-eyed guy named Tyler, kept questioning my methods. "That's not how they do it in the new guidelines," he said, flipping through a manual. The room went quiet, all eyes on me. I took a breath, keeping my voice even, and explained how real-world chaos often outpaced textbooks. He nodded, but his smirk didn't fade, and I felt a flicker of doubt. Was I outdated like Samantha seemed to think? When the day ended, I lingered in the training room, wiping down the whiteboard. My locker was down the hall, and I taped Samantha's old superhero drawing inside a private anchor. I didn't look at it today. I didn't need to. The hospital had given me a spark, but it also showed me how much I'd have to fight to keep it. I drove home, the sky bruising purple, my hands tight on the wheel. Ethan was waiting when I pulled into the driveway, leaning against his truck, a thermos of coffee in hand. His face was drawn like he hadn't slept. "Long day," he asked, falling into step as I headed inside. "Long enough," I said, kicking off my shoes. "What's up?" "You look like you're carrying the world." He hesitated, setting the thermos on the counter. "It's Sam. She's been off since you told her about the hospital, and I'm picking up extra shifts to cover her tuition. It's a lot." My heart sank, guilt twisting in my chest. I'd pushed for this job to reclaim myself, but I hadn't thought about the ripple effects. Ethan was stretching himself thin, and Samantha was still a wall I couldn't breach. I reached for his hand, squeezing it. "You don't have to do that alone, Ethan. We'll figure it out." He shook his head, his jaw tight. "I want to, Mom. But Sam's got to step up too. She's acting like you betrayed her by not taking that stupid cashier job." His words landed heavy, freezing me where I stood. Betrayed. The irony was almost cruel. I'd fought to be more than her verdict, and now she was turning it back on me. The kitchen felt too small, the air too still, and I realized this new path wasn't just about me. It was changing us all, and I wasn't sure if I'd made things better or broken them more. I stood in the kitchen, Ethan's words hanging like smoke. Samantha thought I'd betrayed her. The irony twisted in my gut, bitter and sharp. I wanted to march to her room, demand she explain, but my legs felt leaden, rooted to the tile. Ethan grabbed his thermos, muttering about a late shift, and left me alone with the hum of the house. I sank into a chair, staring at the counter where I'd left a stack of bills, their edges curling like they were tired of waiting. The next day, I was back at the hospital, but the spark from my first shift felt dimmer. I led a training on wound care, my voice steady as I demonstrated bandaging techniques, but my mind was elsewhere. Every pause, every glance from the trainees felt like a judgment, as if they could see the cracks in my resolve. I kept moving, kept teaching, but Samantha's shadow followed me, her accusation heavier than any clipboard. When I got home, the house was quiet, too quiet. Samantha's shoes were by the door, but she wasn't in the living room or kitchen. I found her in the backyard, sitting on the old swing set, her knees pulled up, staring at the grass. The sight stopped me cold. She looked small, like the girl who'd sit there after a bad day at school, waiting for me to make it better. But now her face was closed off, her eyes fixed on some point I couldn't see. I stepped outside, the evening air cool against my skin. "Samantha," I said, my voice soft but firm. "Can we talk?" She didn't look up, just pushed the swing gently with her foot. "What's there to say, Mom? You're doing your thing now." Her tone was flat, but it cut deep, a blade wrapped in indifference. I sat on the swing next to her, the chains creaking under my weight. "I heard you're upset about the hospital job. Ethan told me." She snorted a sound so unlike her it made my chest ache. "Ethan talks too much. I'm not upset. I'm just... whatever." I gripped the chain, my knuckles tight. "You're not whatever. You're my daughter, and you're acting like I've done something wrong by choosing this." Her head snapped up, her eyes meeting mine for the first time. They were hard, but beneath the anger, there was something else, fear maybe, or shame. "You were supposed to take the supermarket job," she said, her voice low. "It was easy, close, no pressure. But you had to go back to the hospital like you're too good for anything else." I stared at her, my breath catching. Too good. The words were a slap, twisting my choice into arrogance. I wanted to tell her about the years I'd given up the nights I'd worked through grief to keep her fed, but my throat closed. Instead, I said, I chose the hospital because it's who I am. I thought you'd be proud. Her laugh was brittle, almost a sob. Proud. I'm tired, Mom. Tired of worrying about money, about you, about everything. And now you're back at work, but it's not for us. It's for you. The truth in her words landed like a stone, heavy and cold. I thought I was fighting for myself, but to her, it looked like I'd abandoned her. The swing creaked as she stood brushing past me toward the house. I'm going inside, she said, her voice barely audible. Just do what you want. I stayed there, the swing still swaying, the backyard silent, except for the rustle of leaves. Her words sank into me, each one a weight I hadn't expected. I'd taken a stand, but at what cost? Samantha's door slammed inside a faint echo of her retreat, and I felt the ground shift beneath me. I'd won something for myself, but I'd lost her trust, and the realization left me hollow, staring into the dusk, with nothing to hold on to. The morning sun filtered through my kitchen window, casting long shadows across the table where I sat with a mug of tea. It was Saturday, my first day off since starting at the hospital, and the house was still, no hum of urgency, no weight of expectation. I'd woken early not from worry, but from a quiet need to be alone, to let the world settle around me. My fingers traced the mug's handle warm from the steam, and I felt a calm I hadn't known in months. I'd started small rituals to anchor myself, like these mornings with tea instead of coffee, a subtle shift to mark the woman I was becoming. The hospital had steadied me, its demands familiar, yet new. But it was more than that. I was learning to carry my own worth, not Samantha's verdict or Ethan's worry. The thought of them stirred a soft ache, but it wasn't sharp anymore, just a bruise that would fade with time. I decided to cook tonight something simple, a way to bring us together without forcing it. I pulled out ingredients for chicken stew, the kind my mother used to make thick with carrots and herbs. The act of chopping, stirring, felt like a meditation, each slice of onion a small reclaiming of my space. I hummed as I worked an old folk tune I hadn't thought of in years, and the sound filled the kitchen, soft but sure. Ethan showed up first, his hair damp from a shower, his smile easy for the first time in weeks. "Smells good, Mom," he said, leaning over the pot. "What's the occasion?" "No occasion," I said, stirring the stew. Just felt like family. He nodded, grabbing a spoon to taste the broth, and I saw the boy he'd been always sneaking bites before dinner. We talked about his work, how he'd been sketching plans for a small carpentry business on his breaks. His eyes lit up, and I listened, really listened, letting his dreams fill the space between us. It was a gift, this moment, and I held it close, knowing how rare it was. Samantha arrived later, her steps hesitant as she walked in her backpack slung over one shoulder. She paused in the doorway, her eyes flicking to the stove, then to me. "You're cooking," she said, her voice neutral, but there was a question in it, like she was testing the air. "Thought we could eat together," I said, keeping my tone light. "Been a while." She nodded, dropping her bag and sliding into a chair. The tension was there, a thin thread stretched tight, but she stayed, and that was enough for now. We set the table together, her movements careful, like she was afraid to break something. I showed her how to knead dough for biscuits, my hands guiding hers, and she followed, her fingers clumsy but willing. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start, a fragile bridge we were both stepping onto. As we worked, she talked haltingly at first about a sociology class she loved, how it made her question things she'd taken for granted. I watched her face the way her brows furrowed when she got excited and saw glimpses of the girl who'd once told me everything. Ethan joined in teasing her about her professor's bad ties, and the kitchen warmed with their laughter, a sound I'd missed like air. But I noticed Samantha's phone buzzing on the counter, her eyes darting to it every few minutes. Each glance was a reminder of the world pulling her away the influences I couldn't control. I didn't push, didn't ask who was texting. I just handed her a biscuit to butter my hand, brushing hers, and felt the weight of what we still had to mend. The stew simmered, the aroma wrapping us in something like hope, and I let myself breathe slow and deep, trusting this moment to carry us forward. Dinner was over the dishes, stacked in the sink, but I left them there, choosing instead to step outside. The backyard was cool, the grass damp under my bare feet, as I walked to the edge of our small lot. I'd been meaning to start a garden, something simple, maybe herbs or wildflowers. The idea had come to me weeks ago, a quiet urge to put down roots in a new way. Tonight, it felt like the right time to begin. I knelt by a patch of earth near the fence, my hands sinking into the soil, soft and loamy. The act was grounding each scoop a small act of faith. I'd bought a packet of basil seeds on a whim, and I scattered them now, pressing them gently into the dirt. Samantha's laughter from inside drifted out, mingling with Ethan's low voice, and I paused, listening. They were arguing over a board game, the kind of bickering that felt like love. I smiled, but didn't go back in. This moment was mine. I stood brushing dirt from my knees and walked to the porch, settling into an old rocking chair. The street was quiet, just the hum of crickets and the occasional car passing. I thought about the hospital, how it had given me purpose, but also shown me my limits. I wasn't the nurse I'd been, not anymore, but I was something else, something I was still shaping. The thought didn't scare me now. It felt like a gift, this chance to grow into myself again. Rachel called as I sat there, her voice crackling through the phone. "You holding up, Clara? Heard you're a big shot at the hospital now." I laughed softly, the sound blending with the night. "Hardly. Just figuring things out, same as always." She went quiet for a moment, then said, "You sound different. Stronger." Kids notice it too. I glanced at the house, the warm light spilling from the windows. "They're trying. Samantha's still half in, half out, but we're talking. It's enough for now." Rachel hummed, her tone warm. "You're enough, Clara. Don't forget that." Her words settled over me, simple but heavy, and I thanked her before hanging up. I rocked gently, the chair creaking, and let my mind wander to Tom, to the life we'd planned before he left us. I used to think strength meant carrying everything alone, but now I saw it differently. It was in these small acts, planting seeds, listening to my kids, choosing myself without guilt. I pulled a folded paper from my pocket, a note I'd found in a drawer that morning. It was from Tom, written years ago. Just a line. "Keep going, Clara. You're tougher than you know." I'd forgotten it existed, but now it felt like a whisper from him, a reminder I'd carried us this far. I tucked it back, my fingers steady, and looked at the stars, faint but steady above. The garden would grow, or it wouldn't. Samantha would come closer, or she'd need more time. Either way, I was here whole in a way I hadn't been before. I stood ready to go inside, but paused at the door, my hand on the knob. The laughter had faded, replaced by the soft clink of dishes being washed, Samantha and Ethan working together. I didn't need to see it to know it was real. I closed my eyes, breathing in the night, and felt a stillness, a quiet that wasn't empty, but full, like the earth I'd just planted. I was ready for whatever came next. Months had passed since that night in the backyard, and life had settled into a rhythm I hadn't expected. I woke early most days, slipping into sneakers for a walk around the neighborhood before the hospital called me in. The streets were quiet, then lined with maples just starting to turn gold, and I'd listen to the crunch of leaves underfoot, letting the world feel simple. My consulting role had grown not in hours, but in meaning. I'd started mentoring one-on-one sitting with new nurses over coffee, helping them navigate the fear of their first big mistake. Their trust, their questions filled a space I hadn't known was empty. At home, things were steadier. Samantha and Ethan came over every Sunday, a habit we'd carved out without forcing it. We'd cook play cards or just sit on the couch, the TV humming in the background. Samantha was softer now, her edges smoothed, though she still carried a guardedness I didn't push. Last week, she'd brought over a batch of muffins she'd baked lumpy but earnest and set them on the counter with a shy smile. "Don't laugh," she said, and I didn't. I ate too, the blueberry tang sharp on my tongue, and felt a warmth that wasn't just the food. Ethan was lighter too, his carpentry dreams taking shape. He'd rented a small workshop, and sometimes I'd visit watching him sandwood until it gleamed his hands, sure in a way that made me proud. He didn't talk much about the months we'd struggled, but I saw it in the way he hugged me tighter, like he was making up for lost time. We were finding our way, not perfect, but real. I'd started painting again, a hobby I'd abandoned after Tom died. My spare room was now a makeshift studio, the walls lined with canvases of half-finished landscapes, bold strokes of green and blue. It wasn't about talent. It was about the act, the quiet hours spent with a brush, letting my thoughts spill onto something tangible. One evening, Samantha wandered in her eyes, scanning the paintings. "These are good, Mom," she said, her voice surprised, like she was seeing me for the first time. I just nodded, dipping my brush in ochre, and let the moment sit. The hospital gave me structure, but it was these small things, walks, painting, Sunday dinners, that stitched me back together. I wasn't the nurse who'd burned out, or the mother who'd crumbled under Samantha's words. I was Clara, still figuring out what that meant, but no longer afraid of the question. I'd learned to sit with my own quiet, to let it be enough. One morning, as I laced up my sneakers, I found a small package on the porch. No note, just my name in Samantha's careful handwriting. Inside was a leather journal, its pages blank but heavy with possibility. I ran my fingers over the cover, smooth and cool, and felt a lump in my throat. It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was her way of saying she saw me, that she was trying. I tucked it into my bag, promising myself I'd write in it later. Maybe just a line about the way the sunrise looked today, pink and fragile against the gray. I stepped outside, the air crisp, and started my walk the journal's weight, a gentle reminder in my bag. The neighborhood was waking up, a dog barking, a neighbor waving from her porch. I waved back, my steps steady, and let the morning wrap around me. Whatever had broken in me was mending, not with grand gestures, but with these moments, small and true. I breathed deep, the air cool in my lungs, and kept walking, ready for the day. As the weeks turned into months, I found a new cadence to my days. I'd taken to writing in the journal Samantha gave me, filling its pages with fragments of thoughts. Not grand stories, just truths I was uncovering. I wrote about the way the hospital's hum felt like a heartbeat, about the pride in Ethan's eyes when he showed me his first finished chair, about the way Samantha's voice softened when she asked me about my day. These weren't big moments, but they were mine, and I held them close like stones smoothed by a river. One evening, I sat on my porch, the journal open in my lap, a pencil tucked behind my ear. The air was thick with the scent of cut grass, and the sky glowed orange, heavy with dusk. I'd started bringing my paints out here sometimes, mixing colors on a small palette. But tonight, I just wrote letting the words spill. I thought about Samantha's words all those months ago, how they'd cut so deep I thought I'd never heal. I'd been so angry, so lost, but now I saw them differently. They weren't just her fear. They were a mirror showing me where I'd let myself fade. I closed the journal, my fingers lingering on its cover, and looked out at the street. A kid rode by on a bike, his laughter sharp in the quiet, and I smiled, remembering Samantha at that age, fearless and bright. I'd spent so long trying to be her shield, I'd forgotten how to be her equal, someone who could stumble and still stand. Her words had forced me to look at myself to see the woman who'd stopped fighting for her own light. In a way, her cruelty had saved me, pushing me to choose myself, not out of spite, but out of necessity. I thought about forgiveness, not the kind that erases pain, but the kind that lets you carry it differently. I didn't need Samantha to be perfect, or Ethan to save me, or even Tom's memory to guide me. I needed to trust myself to know that my worth wasn't tied to what I gave others, but to what I held inside. That was the lesson, hard won and quiet. You can break, you can hurt, but you can also rebuild piece by piece until you're whole in a way you never expected. Samantha came over that night unannounced, her hair loose, a scarf knotted around her neck. She sat beside me on the porch, her hands folded in her lap, and we didn't speak for a while, just watched the stars blink into view. "I'm trying, Mom," she said finally, her voice low. "I know I messed up." I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "We both did, but we're here now." She nodded, her eyes bright, and I saw the weight she'd been carrying, the fear of failing me, of losing us. I didn't promise it would be easy. Didn't say we'd never hurt again. I just held her hand, the silence between us, full of something new, something honest. We were learning each other again, and that was enough. I stood stretching and picked up a small canvas I'd left by the door, a rough sketch of the horizon. I handed it to Samantha, a wordless gift, and she took it, her fingers brushing mine. "For you," I said, and she smiled, a real one, the kind that reached her eyes. I didn't need her to say anything. The moment was complete, a quiet stitching of what we'd torn. What's a moment that broke you open only to show you your own strength? I'd love to hear it in the comments, to know what keeps you going when the world feels heavy. If this story touched you, please hit like, subscribe, and maybe share it with someone who needs it. Thank you for sitting with me through this, for letting these words find you. Here's to healing, to finding light in the cracks. Take care, and I'll see you soon.